Good afternoon. On behalf of our team at RDIC, we'd like to welcome Doug Charco. He's here this afternoon to discuss the type of work he does, the training he received, characteristics they look for in a candidate, the career opportunities, salary expectations, and the working conditions. Just a reminder before we begin that after you watch this presentation, please complete the survey found on our website, either by using the QR code or going to www.rdiec.ca. By completing this survey, you are automatically entered to win a $50 gift card, which will be drawn for at the end of every month. Thanks again to Doug for this informative presentation to help students in their quest to make a better choice about their future employment opportunities. Take it away, Doug.
All right, thank you, Doug. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Doug Charco. I'm a meteorologist, but I'm not the guy you see on the TV. I'm the guy who spends the night shift writing the forecast for people on the radio to read in the morning. Or I can be the guy who writes the forecasts for the airports, so Air Canada knows how much fuel they're going to need to get from Vancouver to Toronto. I can even be the guy that tells the government of Nova Scotia that a hurricane is on its way in 5 days' time and they're going to have power outages and flooding and start to prepare for possible disaster. So if it's not on the TV, it's not just about talking about weather on the TV. What is meteorology? Meteorology is a study of the atmosphere and the conditions and mechanisms that create the weather. So we're looking at focusing on the forecasting of the daily weather conditions for today and the next couple of days. And a lot of work has gone into figuring out how things happen. Why does that cloud form? How does a hurricane form? With the introduction of the scientific method in the 1700s and the fundamental discoveries in chemistry and physics, people started recognizing that that applied as well to the atmosphere and to the weather. And over the last 200 years, that science has evolved. It's meteorology is part of what is called the atmospheric sciences. Looking at, there's other branches such as atmospheric chemistry, climatology, which is looking at the average weather conditions over long periods of time. There's air quality, which is sort of related to air chemistry, but that is focusing on the air that we breathe and how people are affecting the air down where the animals and people live. And that relates as well, air chemistry into climate change. Because of our effect on the chemistry of the atmosphere, we are having an effect on the overall climate, and that's a big branch as well of the atmospheric science. But meteorology is just focusing on the day-to-day weather for the next couple hours and the next couple of days. So how do you get into this meteorology game? I'm originally from Regina. I was born and raised here. I went to Central Collegiate. Go Gophers. Went to the University of Regina, studying in physics originally. I have to admit, I probably didn't work hard enough. So I switched my major to geography and then ended up with a Bachelor of Science in Geography. And in that geography degree, there were classes that introduced me to meteorology and climatology, and I found that quite interesting. And as well, growing up on the prairies, the weather is part of our life. It's in your face. You can't avoid it most days. So it was always something that was interesting to me and the family, and it was just intriguing to figure out or understand more how this weather happens. So from there, I went on to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and I did a one-year diploma in meteorology. So even though you learn the theory and the mathematics and the concepts, you can't write a forecast to save your life. So when I got hired by Environment Canada, there was another course 1 year with them, and that's where you learn to apply all this theoretical knowledge of meteorology. And you get into the nuts and bolts of actually creating a forecast. And that was quite interesting too. So as you see, here's a meteorologist at the desk. She's hard at work analyzing the maps here. And that's the thing, what are the traits a meteorologist needs to get into, you know, why do you want to do this job? I find that everyone that I know that became a meteorologist, they have a scientific mind. They love science, not just meteorology, all branches of science. They find it all interesting, and they're very curious. They want to know how things work. And knowing and understanding how the weather works is pretty cool from a day-to-day perspective. There's a lot of math involved. So maybe you're not good at math, but as long as you're not afraid of the math, you can get through it. I wasn't great at math, but I did it. I did a lot of math being in the physics program, and I've forgotten more than I remember now. Working with computers as well is very, very important. Of course, that's a major tool of the job for meteorology, but it's not just a matter of clicking and looking at data and information. If you want, you can get into aspects of the job where you're doing some coding, programming, even creating your own little models. So there's lots of room for branching out. Within Environment Canada, I found it was really cool because part of the job is to keep up with the changes. There's a lot of research, a lot of changes happening in the field of meteorology. And so you need to keep up with that. And they give you time, they're called project shifts, where you are reading papers, looking up the latest research, and then as well, developing techniques to help people in the office, like this meteorologist here. A lot of that display system was created by meteorologists on their shifts. They said, hey, I think we could do this better. And they'll write a computer program to create a different display system. And I got into that a little bit. I found that very interesting. So then you go through all that training, all that education. And when I finished the course with Environment Canada, they said, congratulations. You have half the skills required to be a good meteorologist. The rest is experience. And that was true 30 years ago. And it's still pretty true today. As good as the computer models are, they're not the final answer. For example, last week we had super warm temperatures, and some of the models were actually saying it was going to be cold, below zero. Some of them were saying it was going to be incredibly warm, 15 degrees, and we ended up in between. So the meteorologist had to look at all those different models and decide which one to choose. Again, in this image here, this is what she's doing. She's evaluating what model is probably going to be the best model to look at for today's forecast. So as I said, I went on to work with Environment Canada. I'm going backwards. But there are other private companies. The other big one in Canada is the Weather Network. Of course, most of them are working on TV. So they all have meteorology degrees and they focus on the presentation aspect of the forecast. They also write the forecast themselves. Weather Network also employs research meteorologists to produce models that they use in-house. So again, more on the computer side of things. There are a few private companies, mostly associated with, again, TV, radio production, And then there's ocean routes on the East Coast. They'll be looking at producing marine forecasts for shipping traffic. And then there's a smattering of other employers. Excuse me. The military is something that I did a lot with. Not directly as an employee, though, of the military. In Canada, the military borrows meteorologists from Environment Canada, but it was something that I really enjoyed because you work with the customer. Usually you write a forecast, you send it out on the network, and it goes out to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that you never see, you never talk to. But the thing I liked about working with the military is that you were dealing with the pilots face to face every day. And it was really cool. So you could explain in better detail what the forecast was for their flight, what the risks were. And then when they came back, you got the feedback. They'll give you a thumbs up, say, hey, that was awesome forecast today. Or they'll point out the things that weren't quite correct. And then there are the days where they're going to say, oh my gosh, you were so wrong today. And that's a fact of life of being a meteorologist. You have to accept that sometimes you're going to be wrong. I hate being wrong, and you learn to deal with it, but it is a fact of life. So a big part of the job for the meteorologist is looking at data information. There is a ton of it. Anyone who's interested in the weather knows everyone's got a forecast on their phone. The web has a dozen or so websites that have different forecast materials available on it. And that's the bread and butter. That's the main job of the meteorologist, is wading through the data and deciding day to day what to look at. Because every model has its weaknesses and strengths, and you're going to decide which one you think you're going to use for the day, or which several ones you're going to use for the day. So you have the reality, that map, that lovely black and white map. A lot of people I know, when I try and show them these things, they say, I don't know what I'm looking at. and it's funny, it's kind of like looking at x-rays. People don't see the details. They don't see, like in this map, you can see where North America is. You can see Canada, Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, but it's not really obvious right away. The map with the colors on it gives you a bit more detail, a bit easier to read. You can actually see where the land is, and the colored areas are telling you where the precipitation is going to be. So the satellite imagery is a big part of the job. It was interesting at a conference late last year. They were saying that 95% of the information coming from satellites is not used. There's only 4 weather satellites over North America, but they produce a huge, huge amount of data, and you just can't wade through it all. So again, you're picking and choosing what information you're going to want to use. And it is quite fascinating to be able to see the detail. The satellite imagery I found is like an X-ray, equivalent of an X-ray of a human body. It's an image of the current state of the atmosphere, and there are all sorts of cool little details that you can pick out from those images. You can see where the atmosphere is very unstable and will be producing showers and thunderstorms. You can see, of course, obviously where it's going to be very sunny, but you can also tell where, hey, there's going to be a lot of wind today. It's going to be very unstable for flying. And then, of course, oh, there's a hurricane over the ocean. In the old days where you didn't have radios, you didn't have the traffic, nobody knew these storms were out there. And even in the 1960s, when the first satellite imagery came about, one of the first images they saw was of a hurricane, and it took them a while to figure out what they were looking at because they had no idea it was out there. So the innovation of the satellite imagery, and it's not just the images anymore, the technology is improving, so you're able to determine temperature, humidity. The radar is starting to measure the wave heights over the ocean, and that can give you a good indication of what the wind speed is over the entire ocean, which is quite incredible when you think about it. So even though we have satellites and they're producing some good data, we're still using weather balloons today. You still need to get an accurate depiction of what is happening in the atmosphere. And with these balloons, they literally tie a little box to it, which will measure temperature, humidity, and by motion of the wind, your basic physics calculations, you can get the wind speed at various levels. So these balloons are going up. I think there's about 10 sites still left in Canada, and they produce these pretty cool looking graphs. The graph that's shown in this image was developed about 150, 170 years ago, which to me is pretty incredible. Even then, without all the technology, without all the data, they had a deep understanding of how things work mathematically, and they came up with this graph. It's called a T-phi-gram, and you can get all sorts of huge information out of there. You can tell if you're going to have a thunderstorm today, 12 hours from now. You can tell if fog is going to develop overnight. You can tell if it's going to be a super windy day or a light wind day. So many incredible details. Freezing rain. Is it going to snow or rain or a freezing rain? Lovely, lovely thing. And again, just another example of how cool science is as far as I'm concerned. So for the meteorologist, I am considered an operational meteorologist, which means I'm writing forecasts on a daily basis. You're going to have a research meteorologist that works on mathematical models. You can have the computational meteorologist developing the weather models, working with the computers, but I specialize in operational meteorology. And there's different branches to that as well. There's the public side, aviation, and marine. So with the aviation, that's where you usually start off with as a young meteorologist. It's not because you're inexperienced, but there's a lot of detail, and you actually learn a lot of meteorology because you're focusing on a lot of details, because it's incredibly important to aviation safety that you get those details right. And as a junior meteorologist, you're under a lot of supervision, and you're in an office with 4 or 5 other meteorologists. So there are people with experience to rely on and to help you get those details down. So in this map that you're looking at, it's called a general aviation forecast. There's an aviation center in Vancouver, in Edmonton, in Montreal, and in Gander, Newfoundland. And they all produce these maps for their regions, which give the pilots from the small little Cessnas all the way up to the big commercial airliners. They all look at these maps, and they will get details like where the cloud is, how thick the cloud is, where the thunderstorms are, areas of turbulence, and precipitation. So all things that affect the safety of the aircraft. There's the micro downburst. There's an image there, which is a big threat to planes, especially when they're coming in for a landing. That can be a hazard. And again, with that balloon data, the satellite imagery, you're creating these forecasts for general use, but as well, a big part of it is for the safety. There were sometimes I think, you know, because there's a lot of days where there's nothing going on. and it's going to be a nice sunny day, light wind. And sometimes I think a meteorologist is kind of like a firefighter. You're doing your day-to-day jobs with no excitement, kind of ho-hum, but then there's these situations where things come up, and that's where you're needed. You know, you got to warn the user, the pilots, that there's these dangers out there, and that helps them get through their day safely. And that's from your assistance, from your information. With the aviation, a leftover the old days before the explosion of rapid communication, everything was in code, and a lot of that code is still left over today. So on the map, at first you look at it and you go, what on earth is that? There's all codes. And here's an aviation forecast that looks at the next 18 to 30 hours for the Regina Airport. And again, it's all written in the code. So these are the kind of things you have to learn, have to be familiar with. And I thought it was pretty cool. The pilots, you know, you sometimes you have to read these forecasts. So that's why it is a code, and it's read over a radio. So you use these abbreviations, and even if the communications are a bit garbled from the air traffic control to the pilot, they know what you're talking about when you say overcast, OVC, and broken, and strata Q. Another aspect is the marine side. Now you're forecasting for the oceans, open water, coastal, and for the bigger lakes within Canada, the Great Lakes and the big lakes in the Arctic, Northwest Territory. That can be a challenging thing because you don't have as much data as you would over the land. So you could have big swaths of the ocean over the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, for example, and you've only got 1 or 2 data points. So we've got some weather buoys out there. The ships send reports. And the cool thing, like I said, about talking to customers in Gander, Newfoundland, when I worked there, there was a direct phone line where the fishermen could actually phone the meteorologist and ask them about the forecast or report things. Like, to me, one of the most incredible things I heard, the Grand Banks off the south coast of Newfoundland, the shallowest point, the water is about 80 feet deep. And we had talked to fishermen who said they could see rocks at the bottom of the wave. So you can imagine what they were riding through, and that they lived through that. So that's, again, the marine forecast is very important to safety for the fishermen, for the big ships. And I also work with the Olympic sailors. So you can see an image here of the lasers sailing in Spain. Nice cloud picture there with a funnel cloud developing over the village there. There's no problem. It just looked dramatic. And then the bread and butter is the public forecasting. So these are the forecasts that you write that go out on the internet that give a general forecast for today and the next week. There's as I said, there's a lot of automation. There's several sources of forecasts, but these forecasts that you see from Environment Canada, the one from the Weather Network, there's some human input into them. As I said, there's a lot of weather models. Canada has 4 weather models running, going from the very small scale up to a forecast that goes out to 2 weeks in advance. The Americans have 4 models as well that cover into Canada. The Europeans have models, the British, the Germans. All of this information, again, is available for Canada, and you have to figure out which one you're going to use, which one you like the best. If they all look the same and say the same thing, that's an easy day. then you know what's going to happen. When they're different, that's when you start to have to figure out, okay, I'm going to use this model for these reasons. Diagnosing the atmosphere, the current state, and saying which model looks the most reasonable for what's happening now. So these forecasts go out on the internet, and a lot of the radio stations, TV networks, they will also read these forecasts that are generated by the forecaster at the office. Public forecasts come out of the office in Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, and Gander, Newfoundland again. I mention all these places, which reminds me that one of the reasons that I thought Working Environment Canada would be interesting is that there'd be opportunity to move around and live and see different parts of Canada. And that's been very true of my experience. I've worked or studied in Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, Trenton, Ontario, and Gander, Newfoundland. I spent a few years out there. And as well, I ended up in Germany for a year and a half. Back in the 90s, Canada still had Air Force bases with NATO, and that gave me the opportunity to live and work in Germany, which was pretty cool. So if the opportunities are there, you can certainly take advantage of them. So this slide, I'm just showing examples. As I say, there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of web pages that are just spitting out the information, the weather forecast, but these are just generated by a computer with no human intervention. And that's becoming, I don't know, the computers are getting good at the forecasts, but the difficulty even to this day still is the timing and the detail. You know it's going to snow, but where exactly and how much? Boy, the amount of snow is very hard to forecast for the machine and for the people. But that's where the meteorologist puts in his or her experience, because if you're in the same area for a long time, you're going to see the models day in, day out, and you get that experience and you know, okay, this Colorado low is coming up, which likes to produce snow in this part of Saskatchewan, and then you know which model you think is going to look or produce the best forecast. Doesn't always work out, but it's still the best thing that we have. And for businesses and for government, they still rely on the meteorologist. So the more experienced meteorologists, there's a few offices. There's one in Saskatoon. There's one meteorologist. She's the weather preparedness meteorologist. And her job is to monitor situations, and she will contact the government. She will contact Sask Power and give them a heads up saying, hey, 3-4 days from now, we're going to have big winds. You're going to possibly have trouble with power lines coming down. And the governments rely on that. Again, it's a safety thing, and it's protection of property and people. So people say you're just writing forecasts for picnics. Actually, it can be quite important. Just like the prairie thunderstorms, how can you not be in awe of these events? But it's not every day that you're going to have a thunderstorm. And I don't know, it's like sports. When you're up against a big competitor, the adrenaline is there, and in the office you can feel the excitement, and it gets a lot more serious, because again, you know that this has serious implications for people that you're never going to meet, never going to see. But people are relying on this information to keep themselves safe. Not every day, though, is going to be a thunderstorm or a blizzard. There's a lot of days where it is a mix of sun and cloud with a 30% chance of showers in the afternoon. So those are the days where you have time to brush up on the latest research or work on other projects and yeah, get through the day. Some people read a book. One of the other things when I was younger was okay with, the night shifts. Night shifts are okay because that gives you time otherwise during the day to do things. But after 10, 15 years, you get tired of the night shifts. And later on, if and when you have a family, night shift with children is brutal. So think about that. Just more examples of information. We've got some satellite imagery. This is the radar image from a big thunderstorm. Actually, a couple of years ago, one of the aspects that I am more involved with now is working with sports teams and for events such as concerts, the Regina Exhibition. This radar image is of a thunderstorm that came through Regina and shut down the Garth Brooks concert for a long time. It was fun waiting in the Mosaic Stadium Control Center with the concert promoters and the security staff asking, when can we start? When can we start? And it was very slow moving, so it was a long evening. But again, a safety issue. And this is where you have this information, but for insurance purposes, they actually need a meteorologist at the venue to monitor this kind of situation and keep people safe. With all the lightning that was in the area, people had to take shelter. They were hiding inside Mosaic Stadium and inside the Affinity Soccerplex. That was the meteorologist. A big thing of what I do is working with sailing teams. And I help them, big part of it is learn about the weather. So again, understanding how clouds work, how they form and develop, gives me a background and understanding of how the wind will be affected as that cloud develops. And of course, that's very important for the sailing community. And you see in that image, I've given an indication of the wind field. I've made a diagram of how the wind is flowing around that cloud. And so that helps the sailors determine which way they're going to go. I actually spent a lot of time on the water in small boats, watching fluffy clouds go by, seeing how the wind shifts as it goes through, and then as well, warning sailors there's a thunderstorm coming, there's going to be a gust of 40 knots, and you got to get your sails down so the boats don't get blown over. My career path, not the usual one. The sailing got me into the Olympics. I've been to 5 Olympic Games, both summer and winter. I've worked with the America's Cup, big deal sailing event, but that as well got me into forecasting for the Mosaic Stadium, for the Rough Rider Games, and for concerts for the Regina Exhibition, concerts in Alberta. My career path is a bit unusual, and I think that's mainly because I was willing to take that jump. When they contacted me about going to Germany, it took half a second to say yes. I mean, why wouldn't you? The guy that was in line ahead of me was he was spending 6 weeks thinking about it, so they offered it to me, and it took half a second. A friend of mine, he said, if the door opens, you walk through it. And I've managed to have a few doors open from my work and from my experience, and sometimes just dumb luck, but I've walked through that door. So that's why I've lived in Spain. I've spent a summer in Antarctica, I've gone through storms there, been through a Hurricane Bermuda. And like I said, I've seen lots of places in Canada. Not everyone gets to do what I do, and the pay isn't great. Because, like, for example, a lot of the Olympic work is as a volunteer. It's very cool and interesting, but it doesn't pay the bills. So you still have to have your government weather job and pay the bills and mortgage. And if you get lucky like me, then you can get involved with this stuff. But nobody goes to university and say, hey, I'm going to be a meteorologist for the Canadian Olympic team. As far as I know, I'm the only one in Canada that does this, exactly what I do to this extent. And within the world, I don't know, there's maybe a dozen or so people that work with the Olympics, worked specifically with sports teams. So it's kind of a unique feature. It's very cool, and I've had a lot of fun with it. And maybe one day you can look towards that as well. This last image is real, and I use it a lot when I talk to sailors doing presentations, and I say, if you see this cloud in the sky, that's Mother Nature's way of telling you to stay on shore. So if you think you like this, look into it. One of the ways I actually got into it, I went to the Regina Weather Office and I talked to people. So if you're interested in just about anything, go and talk to people, learn about what it is, and that'll help you make your decision. Thank you for listening. Have a good day and blue skies, everyone.
Thanks so much, Doug. That was an awesome presentation. I think we do have a few questions coming out of the office here for you, if you would mind answering.
Okay.
What is the actual, I know you said that you're probably one of a few that actually do the job that you're doing, but for a student in high school, what is the job prospect of a meteorologist right now, not only in the province, but also maybe in Canada?
Yeah, as I said, the big employer is Environment Canada. Within Saskatchewan, there's only a few meteorologists working in Saskatchewan. Most of them are at these bigger weather centers, the closest ones being in Winnipeg and Edmonton. You go through university and it's pretty good. There's a steady turnover. There's quite a few people retiring right now. And like I said, there's still a need for people to interpret, even though the computers are getting good at it. And there's a big focus on artificial intelligence right now. But the goal is more to incorporate the human input with the machine input. So meshing the two. For example, in the United States, they actually have a much bigger weather service, and every state has an office. So they employ a lot of people. Canada, we're more focused in the bigger centers. But if you do get on with Environment Canada as a trainee, currently you start off at about, the lowest is $35,000 a year, which sounds low, but that's your base pay. But you also, there's time and a half for stat holidays, there's overtime, and there's the shift work premiums. So that salary quickly takes you up into the $50,000 to $60,000 range after 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. I was just saying that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, was the wage, because students always like to know that as well. So
yeah.
Another question from
Yeah, Doug, how far in advance can you predict the weather accurately? You know, they give you hourly, daily, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, but we know that as far as you go out, the worse it gets. So
yeah, and that's interesting. It depends on the phase of the weather. If you're in a stable repeating pattern, obviously it's easy to go out even 10 days in advance. the 2013 Grey Cup here in Regina. I helped them out, and it was pretty cool. 2 weeks in advance, I warned them that it was going to be brutally cold for the week and that it would warm up for Grey Cup Sunday. And wow, that worked out so well. On the other hand, you get into a pattern which things are not stable. The jet stream is doing things that are less than normal. And that's where the models and the long range forecasts fall off. And you'll see things like they say day 6, it's going to rain, and then they push it out again. And every day on day 6 is going to rain, and it never happens. So for the modeling, the way things worked in the 90s and the knots, it took about 10 years for the computer model accuracy to go 1 day ahead. So it took 20 years for the weather models to say the next 2-day forecast with good accuracy. And then another 10 years to get in that day 3 accuracy up to a respectable level. So that means we could be needing people for quite a while yet.
Awesome. I just want to thank you personally on behalf of the council, Doug. You did an awesome job. You brought it to life, and there's actually we were just talking about the curricular connections that we can be making from your presentation, and your advice of going out and talking to people is so key, connecting the kids with community. So thank you very, very much for this presentation. You covered everything very well.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, like I say, I don't want people to think everyone's going to the Olympics, because even the ones that have wanted to do it, you know, it's a big time commitment, and they just can't get that time off work. So I'm pretty lucky.
And a financial commitment too, because you're not working and not getting paid.
And that's it. I just signed a contract with Own the Podium for the next 2 Olympics, and I'm getting $11,000. So that'll pay for a trip to New Zealand. Yeah.
Well, in this province, if there's ever a lull in the conversation, you can always talk about the weather. So thank
Awesome.
you, Doug.
Yeah, and I was going to say that it's cool to know this stuff at parties, but only when you're in your 40s.
Thanks so much, Doug. We appreciate this.
Yeah.
You're welcome.